Hey guys, Macca here, making a video about one of the most requested games I have ever played, and that is Clicker Heroes. A lot of you guys have a lot of questions, and I am here to do my best to answer them, and hopefully this video clears up a lot of things for a lot of people. We'll be starting off quite basic in the video, and then making our way into some more and more in-depth topics, talking about all the way about even how to get like past level 1000, but we got to take small steps before we take big ones. So first things first, you kind of have to figure out what the point of the game is, what you're trying to do when you first get started. And the point of the game when you first get started is to ascend. And what ascending does is it restarts the game back to level 1 and banks all of the hero souls that you have ready. Now, you won't have any hero souls ready until you reach level 100, but I'll explain how you'll know how many you have ready and how you're earning them and whatnot as they show up on screen a little bit later on in this video. Keep in mind, my game's going to look very different from yours. I'm pretty far in the game, so I have a lot of things you may not have if you're just starting out. Now, you might be wondering, what's the best way to get up to level 100 so you can do that thing I talked about called ascending? You might be wondering, what's the best way to spend your gold? And the answer to that is to always buy the most expensive hero that you can afford up to level 10, buy their first upgrade, and then move on. Now look, I left a lot of really good upgrades behind, and we'll get back to them, but in order to progress as fast as possible, you always want to buy the most expensive thing you can afford. That's going to be the best option for you at all times. Now, you only want to buy the most expensive thing you can afford if there is an available upgrade slot, which there will be for the majority of the time you're playing, especially in early times. So that's going to be the best way, and now that I have all this extra money and nothing to do with it, I can go back and buy some of these dudes that I skipped out on earlier. We'll buy all of their available upgrades, and we have more and more power as we go down the list, and we're earning gold more and more quickly as we go down the list. But I'm always going to try to be buying the lowest dude on the list that I can afford. Now, once you're able to get to level 100, because you've been buying the most expensive dudes and upgrading them, and you might be clicking away, you'll unlock a couple of things. First things first, in the top middle of the screen, you'll notice that there is a slider that says Progression Mode, and I can click it, and it's Farm Mode. That's an option that you unlock once you do your first Ascension. Another thing you unlock is the ability to get Relics, and we'll explain that in just a little bit after I explain more about the actual hero souls you'll be earning. Now, hero souls can be generated in a variety of ways. Let's go back up the list and buy a couple hundred of these cheap dudes so that I can try to show you some stuff that goes on much later on in the game. In the top right, you can now see that I can ascend for +1. Now, this is the amount of hero souls I would bank if I ascended. The amount of hero souls you get for ascending is based on two things. The first thing is your total hero levels, shown near the middle of the stats screen. You will get 1 hero soul for every 2,000 hero levels you have. So you'll add all the numbers of all the levels of all of your dudes. For every 2,000 of them, you'll earn 1 hero soul. Additionally, you'll also earn hero souls. Let's buy a couple dudes here. You'll also earn hero souls for all of the Primal bosses you beat. Now, there are some Primal bosses that have permanent spawns. They are located at level 100, 200, 300, and so on for every 100 levels after that. There's also a random chance that a boss spawns as a Primal boss. This can be any boss after level 100. Including level 105, 110, 115, 120, and so on. It's a random chance that they spawn as a Primal boss. And defeating these bosses will generate a certain amount of hero souls. When you're in the 100 area, you'll only be generating 1 hero soul per boss. But later on in the 400-500s, you can be generating 50 to 60 hero souls for every boss you take out. So, obviously, the amount of hero souls you get for beating a Primal boss scales with how difficult that boss is. Now, what do hero souls do? Why do I want them? Why do I need them? Are they useful? Why am I even paying attention to them? All great questions. Alright, so hero souls as a base unit do a lot of things. Well, they actually only do one thing, but they can be used for a lot of things. A hero soul is equivalent to a 10% bonus damage. What that means is that if you have 10 hero souls, that's 100% extra damage you do after they've been banked. So if I had 10 ready, you know, if I had Ascend for plus 10, and then I Ascended, and those became 10 hero souls, I would be doing double the damage I did prior. So what that means is that I'd be able to get to the point I was at in the game 2 times as fast, and I'd also be able to get much further in the game much more easily. On top of that, I can use my hero souls and buy ancients with them, which is probably the most important part of the game, and this part you're going to want to listen to very closely. Now there's 2 different builds you can have for ancients. One of them involves a click build, which I would only recommend on console if you have a turbo controller. But I would honestly recommend a idle build for the vast majority of people, which means that you just leave the game and the game kind of plays itself. For that, the ancients I would for the click build, you need Juggernaut. But for the idle build, I recommend, and this is pretty much what everyone else will recommend who plays the game, that you get Libertas and Sia first. Sia will give you an extra DPS boost when you're idle, and Sia will generate more gold for you when you're idle. You can exchange that gold to buy heroes, and then those heroes will generate more DPS because of Sia. You want to level them up somewhat evenly. You might be wondering, what's the formula I should be leveling them up? Should I just spend all of my hero souls on whatever I can afford? And the answer is absolutely not. There is a formula here, and what you want to do is you want to take, for our instance, we'll be using Sia, because Sia is kind of the base, the foundation of what everything's built on here. Take the level of Sia, add 1. That number, square it, and it should be equal to roughly the amount of hero souls you have. In my case, Sia's level 29. We add 1 to 29 to get 30. 30 times 30 is 900. That means I should have roughly 900 hero souls, and I have 918. Now let's say I had 2,000 hero souls. That means I have too many hero souls, and I should invest them into my ancients in order to get more DPS. If you follow this golden rule, you will always be earning the most gold per hour, which means you'll also be earning the most amount of heroes and the most levels per hour. If you follow that rule, you will always end up in the pluses. After you get Sia and Libertas to level 10, you should start investing in your 3rd, 4th, and 5th ancients. For 3rd, I would recommend Mammon, and then for 4th and 5th, I would recommend Mimsy and Dora. These will significantly increase the speed at which you get gold, especially from treasure chests when you leave the game on. Or even when you're not, by the way. The ancients still work when you're not actually playing the game. After you have Libertas, Sia, Mammon, Mimsy, and Dora, you can start investing in your 6th and 7th ancients if you have everyone up to roughly level 30, and we're following that golden rule. For 6th and 7th, we can invest in Atman, which gives us more Primal bosses, and Solomon, which gives us more Primal hero souls from those Primal bosses. Those are going to be very useful. Once you can consistently get to level 6 to 800 on every run, you can invest in your 8th and 9th ancients, which should be Argaev and Kuma. Those will help you get further increase the rate at which you get hero souls. The rate at which you get hero souls is absolutely the most important. Let's speed things up a little bit here. We're falling a little bit behind in the amount of DPS we're doing by not buying any heroes. Now that we've covered the ancients, you may also notice that occasionally on screen you get a relic. Relics can be found in the far tab, and a relic has a formula of when it spawns. It can only spawn after your first ascension, and relics can spawn anywhere between level 100 and 2/3 of your highest zone. Your highest zone can be found near the middle of your stat screen. In my case, it's 460. But let's use an example of 200 as your highest zone ever. If your highest zone ever is 200, you take 2/3 of that, you get 133. A relic can spawn anywhere between level 100 and 133, and it'll show up in your relic screen. You're allowed to have 4 relics equipped at a time, and I would recommend picking relics that complement your build. In my case, I go for extra Primal souls, I get extra DPS when idle, a couple more gold from treasure chests, and I also like to add a little bit to my gilded heroes, which we'll talk about in a second here. Another thing you may notice happening after level 35 is that there's these bugs that show up on screen, and you can click them using the left stick and one of the face buttons. We got to go back up to this list a little bit and buy some of these dudes to increase the rate at which all of our stuff unlocks, because we're falling behind a little bit here. So let's do all that. Hopefully it helps speed things up a little bit. So I was hoping that one of those bugs would show up on screen, but occasionally a bug shows up on screen. You can click it and it'll explode into a bunch of gold coins. Occasionally it'll also generate a ruby. Rubies are extremely important and can be seen in the shop. I currently have 40 rubies. Rubies can be earned through these bugs or also purchased with real money. Now, on this screen, you can spend your rubies however you like, but I'm telling you, there's only one thing that's worth it. First of all, the double all of your DPS forever. That'll really help you out very, very early on in the game, but eventually becomes completely useless. Then we have random gilded heroes, relics, and cooldowns. Those are also pretty useless, and let me explain why. 3 relics can be generated in about half an hour, not a big deal. A cooldown is about 8 hours of waiting, and although it will let you progress much further in the game, it won't generate very many hero souls for you. And then we can also get 3 random gilded heroes. Something else that takes a little bit longer and might seem like it pays off, but honestly it doesn't. You're much better doing something else with your guilds, which I'll show you in a minute. The only thing on this screen worth your rubies is buying a quick Ascension. I promise you that long term, the only thing that's worth it on this page is quick Ascensions, and that's by a long shot. Quick Ascensions are worth your rubies, the other things are not. That is how I highly recommend that you spend your rubies. Now we're going to move on to the Gilded Heroes, which I briefly touched upon. Let's go back up the list and buy a couple things here. We're falling behind. Just want to make sure we're all caught up here with all our upgrades so that we can get through the game, as much of the game as fast as possible for you guys who are watching. You'll notice that some of my bosses are Primal bosses. You know that. You'll notice that in the top right now. If I were to ascend, I would be ascending for roughly 20 hero souls, and then I could spend those hero souls or save them for later. But as for Gilded Heroes, you may notice that you unlock Gilded Heroes. The way in which they spawn is they spawn every 10 levels after 100, only during the first time you beat that level. So the first time you beat level 110, 120, 130, and so on, you'll receive a random Gilded Hero. You can see them using the Gilded button at the bottom of the hero list. These are my Gilded Heroes. Now, when you have a Gilded Hero, you have 2 options. You can click on them in order to spend hero souls to gild them further, which I would highly recommend against early on in the game. Or you can go to someone who's gilded, press X on them, and de-guild them. It will give the new guild to a random hero. So as I did just there, I got a new guild on hero by getting rid of a guild I had on Aphrodite. It went to Atlas. There's a couple people who you want to focus on. They're going to be Tree Beast, Ivan, Brittany, the Masked Samurai, and the Great Forest Seer. These are the guys I would personally recommend that you try to guild up whenever possible, but don't go crazy with your hero souls just to get your guilds in the right place. It's not worth it long term. Now that we have all of these upgraded as we want, you may notice that you end up at a similar scenario to me. You've bought Frostleaf, you have all of his upgrades. Dread Knight seems like he's way too far for you to ever be able to afford, and buying more Frostleaf just doesn't seem to generate enough DPS for you for it to ever be worth it. And at that point, you always go back up the list and start investing in the really cheap dudes at the top, obviously ignoring Sid. Sid becomes completely useless after level 200, and the only time I'd recommend leveling him up is to get up some hero levels so that you can get more hero souls when you end up ascending. Otherwise, don't touch him. The best people to level up here are Tree Beast, Ivan, Brittany, the Masked Samurai, and the Great Forest Seer, and let me show you why. All of their things here are based on their own DPS, other than in Tree Beast's case the last thing, but that doesn't really matter. If they have 4 things based on DPS, they're usually a great build. So let me show you how this all scales long term. Once you get Tree Beast up to 7 975. You'll notice that every time you level him up by 25, you get 4 times damage multiplier. The cool thing is that when you get to level 1000, it's a 10 times damage multiplier. And buying that, I can get him up to do half my damage for way less than if I spent it somewhere else. The same rule applies for other guys. The Masked Samurai is a great person to buy if you have the money to actually afford him. He's definitely worth it. That's how you're going to increase your DPS later on in the game. Now, as soon as I am able to afford Dread Knight, which I know seems like forever, but I promise you it will be in less than 5 minutes if the video's still running. As soon as I can afford Dread Knight, I will be buying Dread Knight. But until then, I'm going to be investing in those 5 I mentioned earlier. It's very important that you notice that. There's a couple of people who you definitely do not want to invest in, and those are Sid, the Wandering Fisherman, Betty Clicker, and King Midas. They are completely useless, and any gold you spend in them, you will never get back in terms of DPS. They are very useful with their upgrades early on in the game. For example, King Midas is very useful with the amount of gold he generates for you. But long-term, DPS, after you have all of his upgrades, he does nothing, I promise you. Now, there's a little bit of a golden rule, and as I said earlier, this game is all about trying to generate as many hero souls as possible, as quickly as possible. And I want to share with you a little bit of a grind method that generates a good amount of hero souls for you early on in the game. And that involves getting to level 140 and having roughly 14,000 hero levels for 7 hero souls. At that point in the game, it's a good point in the game for you to ascend, because the difference from 14,000 to 16,000 hero levels early on in the game is quite a bit. The amount of money you need to make that extra jump is not worth your time. So the amount of hero souls you can generate with 14,000 hero levels is going to be the best. You get the best bang for your buck. And you want to keep getting to level 140. Just keep doing it over and over, getting 14,000 hero levels at level 140, ascending. Keep doing that until you're able to get through in about 5-10 minutes. Obviously, you're going to be spending your hero souls on some of those ancients we talked about earlier. You'll obviously be banking some in order to do more damage, and you'll be looking for that perfect combination. Now, another thing I want to mention is that you should never wait around for ascending. If you're stuck at a boss, which might happen, for example, if I get stuck at the boss at 210, I should not wait around to grind out gold if I have time to play right now. If I have time to play, and I want to get as far as possible in the game, and I get stuck at a boss, it is always, 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 always worth it more in the long term to ascend instead of waiting. I know it might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but you gotta trust me. Let's just level up a couple dudes here really quick, because it seems that things have slowed down drastically. That should help a little bit. So, if I get stuck at a boss, I ascend right away. That's going to be long-term, I guarantee you, the best bang for your buck. Don't wait around and get stuck on bosses. If you do get stuck on a boss, you have your power-ups on the left. They're very helpful early on in the game, but later on in the game they become less and less useful because power-ups just don't generate enough extra damage for you to be worth it after a very long time. Now I have, there's a couple of common questions I get asked very often, and they are in regards to generating gold when you're playing the game versus when you're not playing the game. If you want a rough idea of how fast you're generating gold, if you press Y and look at the time lapse, that gold in that box, so for me it's 733U, for that amount of gold, it would take me roughly 8 hours. So that's the rate at which you're accruing gold. Now, you might be wondering, should I leave my game playing with my console plugged in overnight to generate more gold? And the answer is that it absolutely doesn't matter. You generate gold at the same speed, whether you're playing the game or whether the game is completely turned off. When you come back to the game, if it was turned off, you'll be given all the gold you would have gotten if you just left your game running. So don't worry about just leaving your game running. That is worth it in the long run. Let's level up some of these dudes a little bit here. So just to do a very quick wrap up, for those who feel like they may have missed out on something, and just for me to make sure I've covered all my bases. You want to ascend as many times as possible in this game, as often as possible, and if you get stuck at a boss, make sure you ascend and don't waste your time sitting at the boss. In order to get up the ranks, you're definitely going to want to always invest in the most expensive person you can afford that has an available upgrade to them. Once you stop being able to progress, go back up and invest in Tree Beast, the Masked Samurai, Brittany, the Forest Seer, and Ivan. Also, keep in mind that you want to manage your guilds so that they complement this, and also you keep in mind what other guilds you have, as they might be somewhat useful later on in the game. As you're going through the levels, you're going to want to buy Ancients. If you're going for an idle build, start off with Sia and Libertas, then go for Mammon, Mimsy, Dora, then go for Atman and Solomon, and then go for Argaev and Kuma. Now, the golden rule for how you're leveling these guys up is you take the level of Sia, you add 1, you square that number, and that should be roughly equivalent to the amount of hero souls you have. If it's not, that means you're not at the optimum speed at which you can be progressing through the game. When you're in the shop, always save up your rubies for quick ascensions and never buy time lapses. They will never be worth your money, I promise you. For relics, just choose relics that complement your playstyle. And in terms of forge cores, don't worry about those until we get an update with Transcendence in the game on the console. And that's about it, guys. That's how you're going to play Clicker Heroes, and hopefully that explained a lot of questions for a lot of people. And I'm hoping that people learned a lot of new things, and that it ends up being very useful information to everyone. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope the video was helpful. Special thanks to Drop Dead Artemis, Darth Dave 89 for supporting the show on Patreon. Hopefully I see you guys next time. Peace.